welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and I am joined by a journalist and a writer who is here to talk about an absolutely fascinating book. Hello, welcome to the show. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm Valerie Bauman. I'm an investigative reporter with Newsweek and the author of Inconceivable, Super Sperm Donors, Off-the-Grid Insemination, and Unconventional Family Planning.
Could you tell us a little bit about your career and your journey toward this book? I know that this comes from personal experience as well as your investigative background. So could you talk a little bit about, what the journey here was like?
Absolutely. I've been a reporter for 2 decades now. Previously worked for Bloomberg Law as a senior investigative reporter and a senior legal reporter covering the pharmaceutical industry. Also previously worked for Newsday on Long Island and the Associated Press in North Carolina and Mississippi, and covering state politics out of New York State in Albany. So I have a natural curiosity that comes with being a reporter. And it was the summer of 2020, and I was 38 years old when I realized my biological clock had been ticking with a new urgency, and I was out of time. I realized to do it the traditional way with a partner and a family, even though that's how I always had wanted to and always tried to make it work with past partners. It just hadn't happened. And so I, like everyone else, started with the sperm banks, but something didn't feel right. And I made a spreadsheet. I was comparing all of these kind of what seemed like superficial factors, height and eye color and hair color and texture. And I really wanted to get to know who would be contributing half the DNA to my child. So I Googled sperm donor that and stumbled upon this world that I've dubbed the world of freelance sperm donation. And it's an online space made up of websites, dating-like apps, and Facebook groups where people post as either a sperm donor or a recipient. You typically describe yourself and what, as a donor, basic characteristics, where you're located, what kind of methods of donation you're willing to do. As a recipient, again, your location and what kind of methods you want to do. I think the better profiles say a little bit about why you want to become a parent and, what kind of, family structure you can offer. And, it's desperately seeking sperm. They find each other and meet up under varying levels of safety and responsibility. I've seen everything from people saying, I need a sperm donor tomorrow, I'm going to be ovulating. And I've seen people spend months vetting and looking for the right person, which I think is the right way to do it. Insist on STI testing, insist on genetic carrier screening, and pinpoint the right person who will help you make a child.
This is a world that I never imagined existed, but it makes so much sense given how inaccessible traditional fertility treatment and things like that can be. So could you talk a little bit about the reasons that people opt for this? You talked a little bit about your own experience, but are there other sorts of situations that motivate people to try these avenues?
Yeah, again, my motivation was I wanted a donor who I could meet and potentially give my kid more access to. My sperm donor is willing to exchange letters with my child prior to 18 and will definitely meet at age 18. For a lot of people, it comes down to cost. You're looking at $1,200 a pop for a vial of frozen sperm, and a vial of sperm from a sperm bank can be 1/10 of the actual sperm donation. And when it's frozen, it only lives in a woman's body for up to 24 hours. Whereas with a freelance sperm donor, you can sometimes get, say, 3 donations of fresh sperm, the entire emission, if you'll pardon the term, and fresh sperm lives in a woman's body for up to 5 days. And a lot of people feel that increases the odds of success and getting pregnant. So I think the biggest obstacle is price, the lack of fertility coverage, and other people feel, in my experience, in my reporting, that they do not conform to the traditional nuclear family structure. Whether you're a single mother like myself, whether you are, a member of the LGBTQ community and trying to create a non-traditional family in that way. But even a lot of just African American women who have historically, notoriously been treated terribly and have worse outcomes than almost every other demographic in the United States medical community. They just felt like they haven't gotten the care they need. And being able to take your fertility into your own hands can be really empowering. And when we talk about a woman's right to choose, you think about, abortion and making those kinds of reproductive decisions. But it's remarkable how little control you have over your own fertility decision making once you enter a fertility clinic. Now, I'm very grateful that I eventually found a great clinic that helped me, and I'm now, 9 months pregnant. But not all clinics are created the same, and I ran into a lot of roadblocks and obstacles. So I hope that answers your question.
It does. My goodness. Yeah, and I was wondering, how unique this might be to the US, just given, how our medical system operates, and how inaccessible it is here. But I really also appreciate the points about non-traditional family structures and how this allows a greater range of people to have families that conform to their worldviews and how they want to live their lives. You do, speak as an integral member of the community, as you say in the book. And I'm wondering, obviously your personal experiences shaped your research, but I'm curious whether your research then in turn shaped how you viewed your own experience. Did it give you any more insight or any new perspectives on how you experienced it?
Yeah, I think the biggest shift for me was when I started interviewing donor conceived people. I really I was painfully aware from the start when I say I want to be a mom, I want to have a child. That is very me-centered thinking. And it's coming from a selfish place. I think anyone who wants to become a parent, it's usually coming from a selfish place, which is fine. This is our biological imperative. This is how our species survives. But when I talk to adults who either, had, anonymous sperm donors or had been lied to about where they came from, or who encountered sperm donors who weren't willing to get to know them or share personal information. Um, so a lot of people don't care, but you just can't predict how your kid's going to turn out. So it really made me kind of take a step back and think, what do I need to give? What's my responsibility as a parent? How can I put my kid first as I make these decisions about producing them? And I actually tried to work with a friend of mine, a gay man who I've known for like 18, 20 years now. And we did try for several cycles before we got his sperm analysis back and found out that he was actually infertile. So that put me back into the world of online sperm donation. And I found the donor who ended up helping me, who was wonderful. And he understood it was important to me that my child have some contact. And that's why he agreed to exchange letters with the child. And he's also providing me with a lot of personal information about, when did his ancestors come to America? What was a challenge that he thought he couldn't overcome as a kid, but he did overcome? What besides his favorite color and what class he liked in school growing up. So I can put together a children's book for my kid that explains, how IVF works, explains, that that I used a sperm donor, thanks to his biological father. Here's who this person is, and give him as many answers as possible. I really had to reframe the thought about becoming a parenthood and shift, somewhat away from what I want to try and anticipate what my kid could want, and trying to give them as much as possible, in as responsible a way as possible.
Hmm. That is a really interesting point that, these sort of what we are labeling non-traditional family structures and hopefully, in a few years or decades or so, they will not be so non-traditional anymore. But, you know, when you're operating in that framework, that's going to take a little bit of non-traditional parenting as well. So that's a really good insight. You know, this is obviously a very vulnerable topic, I imagine, for you to write about and for a lot of the people that you speak to talk about. And I wonder, like, what is your approach in that regard, both for yourself writing about these very personal things and for, you know, talking to people who have also gone through some difficult things?
As a journalist, I've interviewed victims of sex trafficking, people, after Hurricane Katrina who lost everything. And I try and have a really trauma-informed approach. And I try and let people I interview know, you're in control. If I ask a question you don't want to answer, you let me know, we move on. I'm not here to stick a microphone in your face against your will, but at the same time, telling your story could help other people. And as much as I ask for my sources to open up to me, I had to demand of myself to open up and share a lot of things that I didn't think would end up in the book, ended up in the book, because I needed to be faithful to the story, a slave to the story, essentially. Talking about different things like, my relationship with my family, my religious upbringing to a lesser extent, and the struggle with infertility and going through a miscarriage. Those were excruciating things to include, but I couldn't, it wouldn't be the book it is. I wouldn't feel as proud of it if I didn't, sometimes you just gotta slice the vein and let it bleed,
Wow. Yeah, I imagine that process is also something that you can support each other through, since you are talking about, you know, to some degree shared experiences, and a trauma-formed approach sounds really, really important. You know, and I never really thought about, I think, in concrete terms about the emotional cost of infertility, just even before you engage with the, you know, potential solutions for it. The story about your friend who found out that he was infertile through this process, you know, it just seems like it is, even when it might not have, you know, even if you didn't think it was going to be relevant in your life, it ends up sort of having an emotional impact on you. You also talk a little bit in the book about the kinds of sort of like grassroots support networks that kind of support a lot of these communities and processes. So can you talk about like what that looks like, what the community kind of looks like on the ground?
Yeah, it manifests in different ways. I found a home and my tribe in a group of about seven other aspiring single mothers by choice, who've all had kids now. Like the most recent was in January. I'll be the last of the group who we connected 3 years ago, and we've stayed in touch. I texted the group chat today. And I'll be the last one to have my baby. And, we just got together last weekend, in fact, and just having others going through the same thing, whether it's infertility or motherhood or facing social stigma because you're doing this in an unorthodox way, getting weird questions from strangers. It's so powerful to have a support system in place. On the flip side, what I found was interesting in the world of the sperm donors. Now I have to acknowledge I'm a woman. I'm only going to get so much access to what the conversations between men are behind closed doors. But what I came to learn about and talk about in depth in my book is that there's kind of like two generations. There's the more established sperm donors who are in their late 30s and 40s. And then there's this kind of upcoming generation. And these are guys who grew up and never knew life without the internet. They never knew life without social media and these kind of insulated faux social interactions with women. They never grew up without easy access to online porn. And so some of them have warped and difficult understandings of how to interact with women. And then you throw into this the post Me Too era, and you never hear the word masculinity without the word toxic before it. These are young men who don't know how to be men. And then you present them with this concept of donating sperm, and what a masculine act with clear-cut transactional boundaries. And I think a lot of them are flocking to it, for better or for worse. And what was giving me hope was seeing some of these older men who actually are trying to mentor these younger guys and say, you can't demand sex of women for this. Even if a lot of these guys do have sex to get women pregnant, but they let the women take the lead and make the decision of how they, what method. Do they want to use artificial insemination or natural insemination, AKA sex? And so what was hopeful for me was seeing the communities of men who were hopefully checking each other in certain ways and mentoring each other, and that intergenerational kind of bond that you don't see a lot in other places. It's increasingly difficult for men to find spaces to be men with each other. So it was interesting.
That is fascinating to consider that flip side. And I think it speaks to one of the really valuable things the book does, which is to dispel a lot of cliches or, inaccurate tropes that people think of when they think about this process, whether it's on the books or off, as it were. Another thing that it seems like the support, networks and stuff like that are good for is for mitigating the risks that you talk about, because when you're operating outside of these institutions, right, you are incurring some risks. So can you also talk about what are the what risks do, I guess, both men and women face when they are, embarking on these processes?
The biggest risk are legal. The women are afraid, the recipients are afraid of being challenged on child custody. And the donors are afraid of being hit up for child support. And so those are the big legal issues. Of course, there's obviously health and emotional, psychological issues to consider. But unfortunately, California is the only state that really has caught up with the times on this to create laws that allow for home insemination with a contract in place that protects both donor and recipient. Other states have varying laws, and there are lawyers in every state who are called ART lawyers, assisted reproductive technology attorneys, who can help draft these contracts. Now, a lot of sperm donors in the freelance sperm world refuse to sign a contract because they feel like that's admitting to parenthood. And I can see that perspective, but I figure if a biological mother wants to go after the biological father in court, all she has to do is throw his name out and demand a DNA test, and boom, you're in trouble anyway. So on the other hand, a lot of family courts in America are going to err on, because their goal is to focus on what's best for the child. They're going to err on the side of giving that child to biological parents, even if it's just financially. So they're going to, or, custodial. They're going to probably err on the side of, sorry, you're not a sperm donor, you're a father. Congratulations, the end. Which is why when you are in a couple, if you're an LGBTQ couple or even a heterosexual couple where the husband can't, for whatever reason, provide sperm, the second parent adoption is critical. When you are a single parent like myself, you're more vulnerable. You don't have a second parent to adopt. So you have to really, really trust your donor in addition to having a contract in place.
Wow. So what advice would you have for people who are exploring these methods if, the established medical systems are failing them, or if there isn't really quite space for their type of family in that system?
Well, I would advise they buy my book, Inconceivable.
Good.
But it is a good handbook. But I think the most important thing is do not rush. Sperm is not sperm, is not sperm, is not sperm. You can't make a decision fast about the person contributing half the DNA to your child. I think a lot of people want to think, oh, I'll have a child, they'll be just like me. Everybody wants a mini me. But think about how different you are from how your parents expected you to turn out. Make a decision about your sperm donor very carefully. And it's not just about the blue eyes. Everybody's obsessed with blue eyes. But at the end of the day, what kind of temperament do they have? How do they cope with stress? Are they a good-hearted, kind, and patient person? You're not going to find that out from a sperm bank. But if you go this route, you can. I know this route isn't for everyone, but if I was to go through a sperm bank, I would try and use as much information as I could glean or extract from the bank information to try and get at the personality traits, because I think that's so much more important. You're going to have to raise this little human when they're having a temper tantrum, at the zoo in front of hundreds of people, and you're wondering, who did I choose as a sperm donor? You want to look back and feel like you did your due diligence. So take your time, if you're going through freelance sperm, do criminal background checks to the extent you can. You want to make sure you get the full and real name. You want to have a contract, ideally. You want to do STI tests. You want to do genetic carrier screening. And I have a list of 25 or so questions in my book that are just a starting point for things you can ask to get to know your donor better and vet them. So don't rush it. It's the most important decision you're ever going to make.
Thank you so much for that and for coming to talk to us. This has been so fascinating, and especially coming to talk to us right under the wire like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's my baby's birth month. It's happening.
Oh, well, the timing is just perfect too with the book.
It is.
So, yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Listeners, please check out Inconceivable, Super Sperm Donors, Off the Grid Insemination, and Unconventional Family Planning. By the time that you hear this, it'll be out. So please hit up your favorite library or independent bookstore, wherever you like to go for books. All right. Thank you so much. It's time to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.